Welcome to this first teaching video for the Lord's Abbey. I want to talk today about Julian of Norwich. This is not her, but this is the book that she wrote. She is the first named woman to author a book in English that was published. And, 700 years later, it's still in print. So she lived in the 13 and 1400s in Norwich, England. She became a saint after she died, and so she's known often as Saint Julian or Dame Julian of Norwich. She's thought of as one of the doctors of the church, which means that she has special knowledge to share with us about who God is and how to be in relationship with him. And I produced a podcast about her over Lent and Easter in 2022. And I've been teaching on her for a few years, especially with meditation and yoga as a lens through which to understand her wisdom for us. Of course, she would not call it her wisdom. She would call it God's wisdom that was given to her. So what she wrote is she wrote down 16 visions that she had in pretty quick succession over the course of a day or 2 or 3 days while she was sick as unto death. So in her early 30s, she had a near-death experience where she was sure that she was going to die, and God gave her these visions. Some of them were visual things that she saw. Some of them were just like truths that dropped into her head. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that where a thought comes into your head that just didn't come from you, but feels not foreign, but shiny and clear in a way that very few thoughts maybe do. At least for me. And then some of them are things that she hears. So the visions that God gives her are kind of those 3 different types of experiences that she has while she's on what she thinks is her deathbed. It turns out not to be her deathbed, of course, and she lives at least for another 20 years. And after that intervening time, a few decades, she writes down her visions again, the revelations that she's had of divine love, which is the name of the book that she wrote, Revelations of Divine Love. So there are 2 texts, the short text and the long text. The short text she wrote right after she had the visions, kind of like newspaper in the moment. And then years later, after contemplating and praying over them for decades, she writes them out again, a kind of memoir perhaps, using the reflections that she's had of years and years of prayer in the intervening time to perhaps illumine further the revelations that she was given of divine love. One of the reasons that she's come into great popularity more recently is because of some of the environment that she was having her visions in, the environment that she was living in while these visions happened. So she lived, as I said, in the end of the 1300s, beginning of the 1400s, and this was the time of the Black Death. So she lived through a pandemic when she was young. She lived during the time of the Peasants' Revolt, which was a big bit of an economic and political upheaval in that place and time where she lived. And then she also lived during a time of great schism and transition in the church. It was the very, very, very beginnings and whisperings of some of the Reformation, which wouldn't really take root or bear fruit for the next century. But she knew some of the players who were starting to wonder about things in a different way theologically. And it was also a time when there were different power sources of church power and polity. For part of her life, there were 2 different popes. So it was kind of a trippy time and a time of great transition religiously. Those 3 different areas of life, public health and personal mortality, political and economic change, and religious and spiritual upheaval. Those are perhaps familiar to you in your place and time. Indeed, it's been such a big trend that Julian of Norwich's Wikipedia entry was updated in 2020 to speak about the immediacy of her life situation compared with ours. Not only all of those things, which perhaps you recognize in your own life, but also she was an anchoress, which means that she was isolated in the middle of a city. She, I can go into anchoritism a little bit more in a few moments, but she lived by herself, isolated from the outside world. She had a window probably and could see out. And indeed, we think that she was a spiritual director and probably would have directed through that window or written letters and passed them out. But what an analogy of our experience during the 2nd quarter and 3rd quarter of 2020, right? That kind of isolation and viewing the world through a window with ourselves, isolated and alone in our own little homes. So she understood and knew and wrote out of so many of the experiences that we have had in the last few years. She doesn't refer to any of those or even allude to them, but her work is timeless. And it is a comfort to me in reading her that she was experiencing and went through and was writing out of and receiving her visions and interpreting them through some of the same environments and lenses that we perhaps are experiencing today. So I find her a really instructive and inspiring character to learn with and sit with. She speaks in her visions about divine love, how God loves us, and how we can respond to that love. She asks God questions in a way that I seek to emulate question asking of God. And she is willing to hold the unknown, which has been a big theme in my life in the last few years, and perhaps in yours too. So one of the goals of this space, the Lord's Abbey, is to do exactly that, to make space for and hold that unknown, to not use it as an excuse or opportunity for complacency. Complacency, that's a word, right? But to allow a deep communion with God, which I've found a lot in yoga and meditation. Maybe you will too. Maybe you have. Maybe you won't. That's fine too. And to be okay with holding those unknown bits of our lives, which might feel like more than a bit of your life. It may feel like a lot. So I invite you to be part of this community here. Thank you.